Hi guys, it's Debbie, and did you know they made a fart and burp animated adaptation of George Orwell's book Animal Farm featuring Cybertrucks and Candy Crush? I was so annoyed by this film that I even went back to watch the original 1954 adaptation just to try and wrap my head around the choices that led us to this point. Not with hate, because as I said with the Odyssey, I love to share criticism, constructive even when strong. I mean, director Andy Serkis himself said he's well aware of the debate around the source material itself, Animal Farm, and then of course around the way he adapted it. The only adaptation I haven't seen yet is the 90s live action one, but at the moment I don't know if I can fit any more Animal Farm into my brain. So let's go over everything together, how the CIA was involved in this, my thoughts on the criticism of communism, how I think children aren't stupid, how Andy Serkis being in the Planet of the Apes led us to this point, and how TikTok's bean soup theory somehow fits in all of this. So Animal Farm, across its various iterations, introduces us to a farm where the animals have created their own society. They run it initially with the idea of a collective good for all animals, better living conditions without humans, but due to the rising power of some animals, particularly the pigs, power becomes concentrated in the hands of a few, resources are no longer equally distributed, concerns are suppressed, and the situation eventually turns into a totalitarian society. Animal Farm is the book that probably most of us read in school when literature courses came to the point of covering the dystopian genre. Actually, George Orwell's books are usually introduced together, in particular Animal Farm and 1984, his other famous novel. Now, whether you like Orwell or not, to give you some scale of how influential he was, a ton of words we use nowadays like Big Brother and Thought Police originate from him. He is considered foundational material and reading within classrooms and beyond, but I'm insisting on the classrooms because I'm shocked at basically how stupid this new film thinks children are. It seems to think they can't understand anything that doesn't keep their attention with flashy lights, twerking, shopping malls, iPads, drones, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of the whole film. Every time it tries to offer some food for thought, it quickly moves on to some silly gag. Now I'm going to take a step further back, and I hope future editing me doesn't hate myself, but just as Guillermo del Toro said,
animation is cinema. Animation is not a genre.
Meaning that animation is just a means with which you portray a story, whether that then be a crime thriller, a sci-fi story, a horror movie, or in this case, a dystopian cautionary tale. So once we get our heads unstuck from that concept, we can begin to analyze films a bit more deeply. And I'm happy that nowadays people are starting to appreciate animation at all ages. That being said, there are certainly animated films aimed more towards children, just like there are live action films aimed at them, and there are animated films clearly aimed at adults. You would never show a kid a Junji Ito work. And you don't necessarily need to cut out concepts completely in order for them to be appropriate for children. It's not like we want them discussing authoritarian regimes in the playground at preschool, but they can start to form some interesting ideas in their minds, whether they understand what's actually being proposed or not. I mean, the director of the new film, Andy Serkis himself, said that when he first read Animal Farm when he was 12 years old, he obviously didn't understand everything that was being introduced, but he could tell that there was something deeper going on. I also know the 1950s movie doesn't have the stunning colours and imagery that, for example, Disney was pumping out at the time, but I'm sure that if you showed it to a kid with all its flaws, they still wouldn't be put off completely because it doesn't have a pig driving a Tesla into a pool.
I parked the car!
Kids have inquiring minds, they're curious, and any issue with boredom and attention span probably comes from a variety of external factors, including the AI brain rot we're all very aware of. Kids can tackle a lot of concepts when they're explained in easier words and in terms that they can understand. Orwell himself said how he wanted Animal Farm to be written in straightforward terms because he knew how politicians can deceive people using words that they don't understand. This is also included in the book. For example, when Squealer told them that the pigs had to expend enormous labours every day upon mysterious things called files, reports, minutes, memoranda. Simple things, but when they're unknown to you, they keep you ignorant and deceived. So if you explain something to a kid using simple concepts and words, they're usually fine with it. I mean, movies like Soul actually got both kids and adults to watch a film about death and the concept of a soul. Something similar happened with Coco. I mean, have you ever tried to talk about death with a kid? It gets tricky after a while. Many Studio Ghibli movies cover love between friends, the loss of loved ones, the beauty of old age. There are many examples, and I don't think you can expect a story that basically covers death, despair, totalitarianism, authoritarian dictators to be easily accepted as playful, completely family-friendly movie. I'm not saying that there isn't a grey area in the middle in which you can correctly adapt this, but imagine if they tried to do the same thing with, I don't know, A Clockwork Orange. It would have been met with outrage. Here it almost feels like the animal aspect justifies the family-friendly approach. Now, the original 1954 Animal Farm movie kind of managed to handle that, mostly because a huge part of the film is basically a page-to-screen copy of what happens, including even small details like the opening meeting in which the book goes in depth about the arrival of a cat and its behavior. So except for the ending, the movie never really wanders off into particularly creative changes. It mostly just adapts the book to the screen. But it was also released less than a decade after the book's release, and in a time in which animation was often used for propaganda, and this is where the CIA comes into play. Because Animal Farm, on a surface level, is a criticism of authoritarian communism, mostly deriving from the author's personal experience, where he saw corruption and personal greed take over the collective good. Now, I hope in the comments there are people who know Orwell a lot more than me, who can bring some more insight into this. But from my understanding, although Animal Farm includes a lot of specific allegories, the criticism to authoritarianism that it proposes could be applied to any system of power in which personal greed twists what originally seemed to be the collective good into an authoritarian outcome. The book is packed with instances in which the higher ranking animals lie about what they're doing. They keep the other animals in the blind about their plans in order to keep them complacent. To quote the book, starvation seemed to stare them in the face. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Napoleon was well aware of the bad results that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known. This, along with many other examples, could be applied to any rotten system. It's more of a universal warning about what can happen when apathy, political complacency, misinformation, and blind trust allow the power of a few to slip out of hand. Now, I've always been very vocal against totally black or white narratives, and I think in the current state of the world we are being driven further and further apart along that line, especially with extremely bipartisan politics, which seem to ignore the fact that they both have the same flaws and the same threats. I've more than once seen people blindly, violently defend an ideology they might not have even agreed with, but just because it was proposed by the party or person that they voted for. With this concept of, well, I don't understand it, but if they said it, then it must be the best thing for me, something which again and again returns here. There's never a line drawn. It seems like you must 100% agree with whatever you voted for because by now you've chosen that team and must stick with it. No criticism allowed. I can understand how some people might do this as choosing a lesser evil against a greater evil, or how somebody might be very well informed but they can't find a political party or person who completely ticks off all their boxes, so they choose somebody who is 80% in agreement with them and the remaining 20% are not important topics. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more about this cultish state of mind there's at the moment in which you can't use your brain and make some critical thought, and this happens on all sides of the political spectrum. I'm sure nowadays you could swap a lot of the electoral programs and they would equally promise things that they would never achieve. To quote again, until now the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but in a moment Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In glowing sentences he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when sordid labour was lifted from the animals' backs, and he goes on describing the potential future of Animal Farm, and later, by the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. A lot of promises. Your well-being is not a priority. It is extremely rare to find a person who actually genuinely cares about their community, ignoring the pressures from billionaires, from companies, from foreign countries, the fear of their own personal image being put in discussion. All of this to say that although this at a surface level is a criticism just of communism, I can agree that this can be seen as more of a cautionary tale for any situation where people might genuinely want to improve their society but then fall into mistakes that eventually lead it to becoming maybe even worse than before. In a recent interview, the director of the new film, Andy Serkis, actually said that although this book is criticizing a society of 80 years ago, it's still extremely relevant today, although then he did kind of remove a lot of what the original criticism meant. On a quick side note, I see this black and white ideology being applied to a lot more in society nowadays. Here on my channel, we mostly speak about films, and I read a lot online of people really struggling with nuance. They struggle to see nuance in plots, to understand that there can be flaws within a bigger, better production, of how you don't need to choose a team love this film, team hate this film. They struggle to see how there could be some truth in somebody's completely different opinion on a film. I think it's the internet that's emphasizing this because your algorithm will always give you a confirmation bias. You live in your small little bubble in which everything you think is being confirmed every single day. I mean, jokingly, this is what's being called on the internet the bean soup theory, and luckily a lot of people are waking up about it. And it all originated from this person who posted a bean recipe video on TikTok, and somebody commented with, but what if I don't like beans? Because the world is all about you. You're right, yes. Now that's funny, but imagine that applied to thousands and thousands of people who are then going to vote within their little bubble, not thinking beyond that, or even just making choices in their own life. Anyway, after this long digression, because Animal Farm had a more explicit criticism of authoritarian communism, many governments took it pretty seriously. The CIA in the 50s actually sent millions of copies on balloons into Eastern Europe, but the British government made sure that the book would be translated into various languages. And more famously, a branch of the CIA that was using culture to combat communism acquired the rights for the book to be made into a film adaptation. And this is especially visible with how the 1954 movie ends. Now, I assume that if you're still watching, you're okay with spoilers. The original book ends with a famous scene. No question now what had happened to the faces of pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. And it ends like that. It is left open to interpretation what happens after the ending of the book, whether the animals are just going to accept the situation, if this abuse of power is so strongly rooted that it is impossible to undo what has been done, whether the animals will revolt against it. But the 1954 film goes beyond that, and it actually shows the animals then getting together and revolting against this situation, implying that that's what people should do in real life. Apparently even many other changes were discussed, some of which had never even crossed my mind. For example, how they feared that American farmers could be offended because of how negatively farmers are portrayed. But my point is, can you see how culturally, politically, how relevant this book was, and still is? Yet for some reason in recent years they decided to make this new film adaptation, which seemingly degrades the cultural impact it had. Whether you agree with the ending, the politics or not, we went from a touching story about freedom with well-written characters with nuanced feelings. I have no wish to take life, not even human life, repeated Boxer, and his eyes were full of tears. And we go from that to introducing what freedom means through twerking.
Look at all this deliciousness! They want this!
And this was in the works for 14 years. I mean, this wasn't the Asylum releasing Top Gunner or whatever spoof a few months after the original. They had 14 years to consider the outcome of this movie. Actually, to be fair, at this point, I can see why it took 14 years to make. The director himself said they really struggled to find somebody who wanted to make this film, already because of the nature of the topic, which is difficult to adapt, but then especially in this manner. And director Andy Serkis is someone I've always admired. I'm not going to chastise him just because of this film. I want to know more of the hows and whys. Although Serkis has been known for years in the industry, especially as a leader in the motion capture acting field, he's also dabbled in directing, but I still couldn't understand how he could have possibly ended up here. But I found out in interviews he said he got the idea while shooting the first Planet of the Apes movie, and I guess it makes sense, a world where animals take over after being enslaved by humans, but which later down the line leads to authoritarianism within the ape community. One thing this new movie introduces, and which I'm actually okay with, is the concept of seeing this story through the eyes of a new character, a child, a piglet, which I guess is okay, it's an interesting approach, but what the movie does is then sanitize the whole story. I recently spoke about Blue Heron, a beautiful movie in which we mostly see everything through the eyes of an 8-year-old girl who is witnessing her family really struggling with the older brother's behavior. Now is not the place to get into that movie, but my point is that even if it's seen through her eyes, she doesn't understand much, she's still a kid playing, we as viewers still have a comprehensive idea of what's going on. It's not like we have her mum twerking and burping so that we can understand that it's seen through the eyes of a child. Whereas here, there is a complete change in the vibe of the story, which is supposed to be quite scary and anonymous, into something much more jolly, happy-go-lucky, extremely comedic, with a lot of body comedy. I understand it's a family-friendly movie, so you can't bore the story down with the nitty-gritty of the egg production committee, the Wild Comrades Re-Education Committee, the Clean Tail League for Cows, and again we're seeing a lot of it through the eyes of a piglet. But that doesn't mean that you just have to sanitize completely the concept of abuse of power, and it doesn't even try to include a lot of the pig's oppression. Instead, it shows the rise of power nearly as something that you should be jealous of. In the book, the animals are tired, they're cold, they're worked to their limits, they're hungry. The story is very dark, there's clear distrust forming in the animals' minds, but in the new movie, the pigs go to the shopping centre, they can buy things, and that's what we want, right? They're distracted playing Candy Crush and iPads. The pigs have cool pool parties. It's almost as if instead of oppression, it's a frat house rivalry story, a teenager feeling left out. I personally think that what went wrong here, by listening to a lot of Andy Serkis interviews, is that he insists a lot on the family-friendly aspect of his fear of the film being too messagey, of putting off people from watching it because it's too political. So a lot of the more brutal and difficult concepts have been cut out, leaving the core message as something more subtle that you need to grasp. Now, those are all valid thoughts that somebody making a film should have. It's actually a very big issue nowadays across the industry, where it's becoming increasingly difficult to talk about anything without fear of offending people or covering sensitive topics, which in reality often boils down to fear of box office revenue. They don't actually care about your thoughts. But then if you have those fears, why choose to adapt Animal Farm? It is notoriously a debated topic, especially if then you decided to make it this way. I think Andy Serkis maybe wanted to convey the idea in a Chicken Run or Sheep Detective style, something incredibly funny and family friendly while still conveying darker themes. But of course that isn't an incredibly popular source material like Animal Farm. There are many other aspects of the film which are different from the source material, in particular the scale of the revolution. By the late summer, the news of what had happened on Animal Farm had spread across half of the country, whereas in the new film it is mostly limited to their farm or neighbouring farms. Anything beyond that completely shifts from the original material. For example, people outside of the farm learn about this not because of the revolution, but because it's cute and they have a funny market selling their produce, again with gags and skits. There's also one clear villain in the story, this billionaire who wants to take over Animal Farm with her massive industrial production schemes, whereas in the book we don't have one clear villain. There are of course the farmers, but it's more about the fear of the revolution itself. So although the promotion of this film has all been about taking the source material and slightly tweaking it to make it more accessible to a general audience, in my opinion it's a completely different take on the story. If you're okay with that, then this film is fine. Just don't expect a faithful adaptation of the story. As a Lord of the Rings fan, I'm still very excited to see where Andy Serkis' directing career will take him. He was now directing the new Lord of the Rings film, The Hunt for Gollum. But now I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topic, so make sure to leave a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.